So today, we're going to hear from Amanda Pankau, our Senior Energy Campaign Coordinator for PRN, who will discuss the nation's legacy of abandoned coal mine lands and the communities and lands that they impact. So, Amanda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the subject of abandoned mine lands in Illinois. So we are in the midst of an energy transition away from fossil fuels. But that 200 plus year history that coal has played in Illinois has left its mark on the landscape. Today, I'll share a bit about that 200-year history and what abandoned mine lands are and how they are regulated and reclaimed. It's no doubt that coal's footprint will never be gone from Illinois or from our planet for that matter. But thanks to recent federal investments, we have an opportunity to clean up this legacy pollution and support communities and workers at the same time. So I mentioned a 200-year history with coal, but Illinois' story with coal actually began 300 million years ago during the Pennsylvanian subperiod. The land that would become Illinois was part of the supercontinent Pangaea, and it was situated near the equator. It was covered in a vast coastal swamp, and the climate was similar to what the modern Amazon River region has. The plants that grew and died in that coastal swamp were laid down in layers that were covered with dirt, silt, rock, and over millions of years, the resulting pressure and heat turned those plants into the carbon-rich substance that we know as coal. So this fossil picture here is actually an amazing discovery of a fossilized forest that was found about 15 years ago in a coal mine in Vermilion County. This find turned out to be the largest continuous Pennsylvanian-era fossilized forest in the world at 4 square miles. It contained numerous fossils of ferns, horsetails, and extinct giant trees. This painting is a rendering of what that fossilized forest might have looked like 300 million years ago. So the coal fields of Illinois are part of the Eastern Interior Basin, also known as the Illinois Coal Basin. Despite its name, Illinois Coal Basin, it does include some portions of western Indiana and western Kentucky. Not many Illinoisans probably realize that approximately 2/3 of Illinois is underlain by coal-bearing strata from this Pennsylvanian era. There are actually 40 to 50 coal beds at varying depths and varying thicknesses, as you can see by this generalized cross-section shown on this slide. Again, this is generalized. This is not what this looks like across the entire coal-bearing region of Illinois. We have some of these seams that are near the surface in southern Illinois, but are buried thousands of feet deep in other parts of the state. So it varies across the region. But there are multiple accounts about the first European observation of coal in the United States. One such account has that European discovery taking place in Illinois. In 1668, a Father Hennepin is said to have observed coal in an outcropping along the Illinois River near the present-day location of Ottawa and LaSalle County. Just 5 years later, Marquette and Joliet also document the occurrence of coal on the Illinois River on their famous expedition. But it wasn't for another 140 years that coal mining began in Illinois. By some accounts, the first commercial operation was taking place in 1810 along the banks of the Big Muddy River near Murfreesboro on exposed coal outcroppings. This was common for early coal mining. It was highly opportunistic. Mining was done on coal seams that had been exposed by erosions, like those along riverbanks. So while commercial mining was taking place at this time in the early 1800s, people were primarily mining coal for domestic and local use. The coal boom really started in the 1860s as manufacturing increased and the new railroad network allowed for coal to be shipped to large markets in our rapidly growing industrial cities. Before we talk much more about coal mining in Illinois, let's take a quick look at underground and surface mining methods, because you're going to hear me talk about these and the impacts that they cause. So earlier we saw that profile of the different coal beds in Illinois that are located at different depths and of different thicknesses. Some of these seams are so thin that they're not economically mined. For those that are thick enough, mining methods depend on the depth of the coal and the position in the landscape. So surface mining refers to when we are mining coal from the surface, we're removing the soil and other material that overlies relatively shallow coal deposits and then mining those directly when the coal seam is exposed. The material that we take off from the top of the coal is called overburden. And then when we leave it behind, it's called spoil. Underground mining is a method by which a shaft or slope is dug in the ground and miners and equipment access and mine an underground mineral deposit. The coal is then brought to the surface, cleaned, and transported off-site. Interestingly, surface mining methods allow for a much more complete recovery of the coal resource than do historically. Surface mining methods allowed for a more complete recovery of the coal resource than did underground mining methods. So this graph shows total coal production in millions of tons starting in the year 1882. So we have the year across the bottom and then millions of tons of coal produced across the y-axis. So the first year that reporting was done in the state was in 1882, and that's when this data starts. By 1930, I found data that showed how much coal was being mined by surface methods and how much coal was being mined by underground methods. So in the 1800s, as demand began to increase and those easily reached surface deposits were depleted, underground mining took off and became the primary type of mining in Illinois. Strip mining was being used in the 1800s, but the methods consisted of using horses and mules to pull equipment to remove that overburden. And even with blasting, these methods were not efficient and not economically feasible for the most part. So we really didn't have large surface mining operations at that time. That all changed in 1910 in Vermilion County, Illinois, which is credited to have the first large-scale strip mining operation. Excavating shovels that had started to be used in the construction industry began to make their appearance in strip mining. These shovels operated by steam power and were mounted on wheels, which rolled on tracks. The obvious advantage of this equipment was immediately apparent. The equipment got bigger and more specialized, and the industry was able to move more and more overburden, reaching deeper and deeper coal seams through surface mining methods. By the 1960s, more than half of the coal was being mined by surface mining methods. This is very important to today's conversation because obviously moving overburden, leaving behind spoil has a much bigger impact to the land than did underground mining methods. So nearly 2 centuries of coal mining occurred in Illinois before the passage of any laws to regulate the operation or cleanup of the industry. This resulted in horrific working conditions and accidents for workers, and this resulted in impacts to the environment, loss of farmland, and other impacts to communities. By the late 1970s, over 200,000 acres of Illinois land had been affected by surface and underground mining. Nationwide, that number was over 1 million acres. Local communities, leaders, and activists began to push back on the environmental and social costs of coal mining. 2 such Illinois activists were Anna and Jane Johnson, who were of no relation. They formed the Citizens for the Preservation of Knox County in Illinois. By the early 70s, over 20,000 acres of Knox County had already been impacted by surface coal mining. This is an aerial photo from northeastern Knox County that shows the strip mine landscape. This is, of course, revegetated at the time that the Knox women were working. This site would have been largely unvegetated. Their organization focused largely on the protection of farmland. They filed lawsuits and presented testimony at public hearings. Along with officials from Knox County, they are credited with help getting both state and federal lawmakers to enact legislation that help minimize damage to both the environment, agricultural productivity, and the protection of workers. Similar activism was springing up across coal mining regions of the nation. In In 1971, John Prine wrote his song Paradise about the coal industry's impact to his family's home in Western Kentucky. If you haven't heard that song, I'd suggest giving it a listen. It's one of my favorites. By the late 1960s, Illinois did have some very limited laws regulating the management of topsoil on surface mines, but again, they were very limited. So in response to the extensive environmental problems, as well as the growing health and safety concerns, Congress finally passed the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977. The acronym that we use for this federal law is SMCRA. So that's what you will hear me call this, SMCRA. President Carter signed the act into law on August 3rd, 1977. So Jane Johnson from Knox County attended the signing in the Rose Garden with fellow Knox County leaders Bob Masterson and Robert Seibold. So I want to read you an excerpt from Jane's experience that day. This is something she wrote about on the 20th anniversary of SMCRA in 1997. So I'm reading Jane's words now. Roger pushed me ahead of himself so I could be in the front of the crowd to get a good view of the ceremony we had come so far to witness. The president seated himself and began the simple ceremony, a prelude to the historic signing of the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977. I was overwhelmed with feelings. I stood quietly and rigid as if I were alone in a dream. To think that our years of hard work and struggle and bitter strife had brought us to this place was overpowering. So SMCRA created the Office of Surface Mining, an agency within the Department of the Interior. SMCRA created two programs. One, to regulate the operation and reclamation of new and active coal mining. So mining that was going on in 1977 and after 1977. Because of SMCRA, mining companies were now required by law to clean up the sites after mining, to mine in a certain way, and to provide financial assurances to ensure that those sites will be cleaned up. So that's not what we're talking about today. Coal mining that took place after 1977. Today, we're talking about the other program that SMCRA created. This was a program to deal with the lands that were mined and abandoned prior to the passage of the law. And this program was called the Abandoned Mine Land Reclamation Program. So under SMCRA, unreclaimed lands that were mined prior to 1977 are defined legally as abandoned mine lands. And they are often also called pre-law mine lands or AML lands. So you'll hear me refer to them as AML lands. Sites that are mined after 1977 are often referred to as post-law mined lands. So in addition to impacts to the land, these sites include impacts to water, the air, and public safety, and we'll hear more about that later. The AML program under SMCRA established a fee on coal production to fund the cleanup and reclamation of these sites. The fee is collected by OSM, so that's Office of Surface Mining, and it's collected on every ton of coal mined and then distributed to the states and the tribes that are running AML programs. So as you can see from this graphic here, the collection of the fees started after SMCRA passed, and its collection has expired and been reauthorized twice and lowered each time, once in 2007 and once in 2012. The collection of the fee also expired again in 2021. So I'm going to leave you hanging here to find out how and if that was reauthorized. So we'll talk more about that later. So a little bit more about the program. Our AML program in Illinois is administered by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Office of Mines and Minerals, Abandoned Mine Land Reclamation Division. So each year, Office of Surface Mining calculates the specific proportion of money coming in from that tax on coal, and then it's awarded to each state based on the fee collection, historic coal production, and a few other variables. So the last couple of years, Illinois has gotten about $9.6 million each year from that federal pot of money. In the 40-year history of our AML program, Illinois has reclaimed 35,000 acres at a cost of $433 million. So something to note here when we talk, and this is a little bit in the weeds, when we talk about acres of AML lands, it's actually a standardized acre measurement that's calculated to develop a common unit for comparison. So we're going to hear about certain AML sites that are called high walls. They're like a steep cliff. We measure those in feet, but then there's actually a formula that you can plug feet into, and it spits out acres so that we have a standard unit to compare by. So just a note, not super important, but I wanted to mention it. Right now, we have an additional $25 million that has been allocated to specific projects that are in some state of active reclamation. IDNR's Abandoned Mineland Division assesses abandoned minelands throughout the state. When a problem is identified, it is inventoried in a federal inventory. It is prioritized as priority 1, 2, and 3, and we'll learn more about what those are. And the inventory and maps of these inventoried sites can be found on a website here, and it is available to the public. I just did want to note that the IDNR does oversee an emergency program to address sites that arise suddenly and can be life-threatening or require immediate attention. So if, just for posterity's sake, I put the IDNR contact information because some of these emergency sites can be dangerous. So examples of common AML sites in Illinois, we're going to take a look at a few of those right now. Again, just so when I say high wall, you know what I'm talking about. This is not a complete list. This is just to give you an idea of what some of these abandoned mineland sites look like. They are not all as horrific as this. These are pictures of something called gob and slurry. These are coal refuse or coal waste that is removed during the coal cleaning process. So when coal is brought to the surface, either through surface or underground mining methods, it's not pure coal. There are things like pyrites and slate and other materials mixed in. The coal must be cleaned. We end up with coarse refuse called gob and fine refuse called slurry. Prior to SMCRA, these waste products could just be left on the landscape. Spoil is that overburden that I talked about, what you're digging up to reach the coal seam during surface mining, or maybe when you're excavating your shaft or slope for your underground mine. Obviously, surface mines have much more spoil. So these sites, and I'm not going to talk a lot about the actual reclamation methods. The gob and slurry sites and these sites, they are regraded. They're required by federal law to put cover on them. They're often add in alkaline materials as well as topsoil. And then they're reseeded and monitored for a time to ensure stability. So just a really kind of brief overview of how some of these sites are reclaimed. These are those high walls that I was talking about. This is an exposed face of a steep embankment where surface mining once occurred and basically halted, leaving these steep slopes. So these are often graded to be a safer slope. And again, added topsoil, reseeded, etc. Abandoned minelands can be unsealed portals and shafts that are surface entrances or openings that have never been sealed or barricaded. So these are, of course, dangerous. Acid mine drainage is a problem that occurs on AML sites, both on the sites and downstream as the water flows downstream. This is the discharge of acid material that occurs from the oxidation of pyrite and sulfide materials that were exposed during the mining process. So I mentioned that spoil and the gob and slurry. Those contain pyrite. When exposed to oxygen and water, creates acidic water. So interestingly, treatment of acid mine drainage in Illinois is kind of a relatively new part of the state's program, and the methods for treatment often require ongoing maintenance of varying intensity. So we'll actually talk about that a little bit later too. AML-related subsidence refers to cracks, troughs, caving caused by the collapse of underground mining voids. So when we mine underground, take the coal away, the actual ground surface can sink, sometimes at a later date, unexpectedly. So impacts of all this, AML sites are obviously dangerous. These sites that pose an impact to public health and safety are prioritized for reclamation. AML sites deter local economic development. Land is not available to landowners or communities. Damage from AMLs lowers the biodiversity of wildlife and plant communities. AML fires emit carbon dioxide. Underground AML sites leak methane. Abandoned mines are actually the 11th largest source of methane emissions, and they are unregulated. AML discharge hundreds of thousands of gallons of water pollution per minute in the United States. It's enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 2 minutes. AML lands produce greater runoff and carry sediment. You'll notice here I grabbed a headline, very recent headline, that talked about how the recent catastrophic floods in Kentucky were made worse by AML sites. And of course, unplanned subsidence damages buildings, property, and can be very dangerous. So I alluded to AML sites being given a priority level dependent on how dangerous they are to public health and safety. Priority 1 and 2 sites are both sites that need to be reclaimed in order to protect public health and safety. Priority 1 is from extreme danger. So to date, the AML program in Illinois and across the nation has been required by law to prioritize reclamation of priority 1 and priority 2 sites. We can reclaim priority 3 sites when they're located adjacent to or with a priority 1 and 2 site. So some priority 3 sites have been reclaimed, but usually when it's done in conjunction with a priority 1 or 2. So these priority 3 sites are not at impact to public health and safety, but are sites that require restoration of the land, water resources, and the environment. So if you're curious about what reclaimed abandoned mine land sites look like and what they can mean for a community, I'd encourage you to check out this video that my friend and fellow AML advocate, Dan Fisher, made. Dan lives in Gillespie in Macoupin County. In his own words, Gillespie is a town built upon coal. In this video, and we can get a link dropped in the chat when I have a chance. In the video, Dan shares examples of successful AML projects in his town and county that have meant so much to the community and to the economy. There's soccer fields across from his house that were built on AML sites. Businesses like Ideal Fabricating and Aladdin Steel sit on former AML lands in Macoupin County. Homes and subdivisions have been built on these reclaimed sites. And the city of Gillespie even hopes to turn an old railroad, old mine railroad right-of-way into a community hiking and biking trail. So across all of Illinois, these reclaimed AML sites have meant so much to landowners and communities. We have wildlife habitat, state parks, businesses, recreational facilities, agricultural land, and much, much more. So let's take a look at the unfunded AML projects in Illinois that have yet to be reclaimed. And remember, I mentioned that this collection of the fee was set to expire in fall of 2021. So this graph shows priority 1, 2, and 3 sites across the bottom, the funded costs that we've already completed, and then the unfunded estimate of what's left to complete in the state for each type and then the total. So right now we have an inventoried cleanup cost of $274 million. However, like other states, this is likely an underestimate. There's been some research done on this in recent years as we were approaching this 2021 expiration of the collection of the fee. So estimates in this federal inventory only include construction costs. They do not include design or administration costs. These cost estimates are decades old. So we hear a lot about inflation recently. These cost estimates haven't taken into account inflation for decades. And finally, we do know that the inventory does not include all unreclaimed AMLs in the field. There are a lot of sites out there that we don't know about. In particular, because priority 3 sites haven't been able to be reclaimed much, we think that there's a lot of priority 3 sites that remain uninventoried. So this slide, I'm not going to say much about this. I'll just leave it up here for a second. It shows a map of the inventoried AML sites in Illinois and a table of priority 1 AML sites with both acreage and cost estimates. And these, again, are priority sites that have yet to be reclaimed. I'll just pause for a second. So obviously, this is a widespread problem across Illinois. We know that we do not have enough money collected to clean up all abandoned mine lands in the state or in the country. So we saw this figure earlier that shows how the collection of the tax on coal to fund reclamation of AML sites expired in 2021. So this is one of the reasons Prairie Rivers Network has been engaged in this topic over the last few years. We were anticipating the expiration of this fee and advocating for its reauthorization. So I've been to DC to lobby Congress. Many of you have sent in action alerts. We've worked with active partners across the United States on this issue. And it was imperative for the future of AML reclamation that the fee be reauthorized. So again, why was it imperative? As of 2020, in the 4 decades of the AML program, only 27% of the total damage had been reclaimed. And as I've already mentioned, we knew that these cost estimates were not nearly what we are actually facing. Nationwide, the federal inventory estimates about $11 billion in unreclaimed AML costs. A 2020 analysis looked at the issues I talked about and estimated at about $20.9 billion is actually needed nationwide to clean up AML sites. So obviously super important that we reauthorize this fee. It's important to note that this is a tax on coal, and our coal industry and coal mining is decreasing. So the less you mine, the less there is to tax. So even with reauthorizing the fee, we knew we were likely going to be facing an AML problem in the United States moving forward. So on September 30th, 2021, the collection of the fee actually did expire. It made headlines nationwide. But, and this is a big, exciting but, it's not always often that we get good success stories. So this is one of them. Thanks to advocacy of groups across the state, advocacy of Prairie Rivers Network, people like you, this problem of the expired fee did not last long. Just a month and a half later, President Biden signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. This bill did a lot of things. One of the things it did was reauthorize the recently expired funding mechanism for abandoned mine lands. It continued the collection of that fee at 80% of the prior level for another 13 years. And even more amazingly, it injected an additional $11.3 billion in the program to be spent over the next 15 years. This $11.3 billion boost represents the largest ever investment in abandoned mine land cleanup, and it will create billions in economic opportunity and thousands of jobs in coal communities across 25 states and 3 tribes. So remember, I mentioned that decline in the coal industry. These are communities that are facing other losses of economic opportunity, losses of jobs, and we have an opportunity to clean up abandoned mine lands and invest in those communities. So this bill will send an estimated $1.2 billion to Illinois over 15 years to clean up these sites that were abandoned prior to 1977. This funding is a substantial increase from what Illinois has gotten as annual allocations in the past. In fact, it's 7 times greater. So the past couple of years, we've gotten about $9.6 million a year. Starting this year, we are eligible to receive an additional $75 million on top of that for abandoned mine land reclamation in Illinois. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is being called a once-in-a-generation investment. And for Illinois' legacy of abandoned coal mines and for the communities that these lands impact, this act means even more. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to clean up the legacy pollution of the past and support the communities that long powered our country. So let me repeat again the level of investment in Illinois. Our AML program is typically funded at $9.6 million a year with money from that tax on coal. Thanks to this new federal investment, we will receive an additional $75 million per year. So this additional program means more abandoned mine land reclamation. In turn, it means providing communities with jobs to get the work done. It means cleaner water, giving land a new life that is ready for community or landowner use. AML cleanup jobs extend far beyond just the machinery operators doing the work. We have government engineers and scientists and managers that design, administer, and research these AML reclamation projects. We, of course, have the reclamation construction jobs, but also clerical staff, tree planters, and many more. And there's been some analysis done on the job creation potential from this federal investment. So what does this new money mean? One big thing is that I'm going to call it the infrastructure money as opposed to the money that comes from the tax on coal. So the new infrastructure money means that we can now reclaim priority 3 sites, even if they're not adjacent to a priority 1 or 2 site. So this is more restoration of land and water resources and the environment. With the new money, we will prioritize projects that provide funding to disadvantaged communities. This is part of the administration's Justice 40 initiative. We will also be working to engage the public in the selection and development of AML projects so that they can best meet the needs of communities. A final difference between our regular AML money and the infrastructure AML money is that this new money cannot be used for acid mine drainage set-aside accounts. So this is kind of one of the very few bummers about this new money, but we're going to do something about it. So a reminder, acid mine drainage is the discharge of this rust orange colored acidic water from a mining site. The resulting pollution is harmful to aquatic communities, to people, to wildlife. Remediation of these acid mine drainage areas is often not a one and done reclamation project. Many of these AMD sites require active long-term management and in turn, long-term funding. So Prairie Rivers Network and our partners across the nation and many of you have been advocating for the passage of the STREAM Act to ensure that new AML funding can be used for acid mine drainage long-term set-aside accounts. The House passed the STREAM Act earlier this month, but it still needs to pass the Senate. So today, we're actually going to ask you to take action. Ryan's going to put a link in the chat for me. And with this link, you can contact Senator Duckworth and Durbin and ask them to pass the STREAM Act so that we can ensure that the infrastructure money can be put in set-aside accounts to be used for the long-term treatment of acid mine drainage in Illinois. So Ryan, if you can, looks like Ryan's got the action alert in there. And I'll just give folks a moment to click on that and add your information and fire off a message to Senators Duckworth and Durbin. All right, I realize you might not have it completely filled out, but go ahead and hold on to that. I've got just a couple more slides before we do questions, and hope if folks haven't sent that off, you can get back to that before closing your screens out today. So I just want to mention just a couple emerging opportunities for abandoned mine lands very, very briefly. One opportunity is to look at the opportunity to add clean energy projects to abandoned mine lands. So the bipartisan infrastructure law actually created a new program in Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So this is an opportunity to add solar, microgrids, geothermal energy, other projects, clean energy projects like that on abandoned mine lands. So this is actually a brand new program. It hasn't come out yet. We're going to be keeping an eye on this with some of our other partners and looking for potential opportunities in Illinois, whether through this program or outside of this program. AML sites can be a site for clean energy. Even more briefly, and I realize this is a lot of text, but there is an opportunity to extract rare earth and critical minerals from coal waste. So including coal ash, which is something else Prairie Rivers works on, as well as abandoned mine land sites. So this core CM is actually a project that's being headed up by our Illinois State Geological Survey in partnership with the Department of Energy, other state geological surveys, and other partners, where they're looking at the opportunity to extract these rare earth and critical minerals from coal and coal waste. So something else we're keeping an eye on at Prairie Rivers Network. And then finally, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that we heard all about abandoned mine lands today. We did not talk about Illinois' active coal mining industry. Illinois is the fourth largest coal producing state in the nation. Probably a fact many Illinoisans still do not know. Over the last 5 years, we've averaged about 4.3 million tons, primarily from underground mining methods. So I did want to kind of reflect, earlier you heard me talk about Jane and Anna Johnson, who were Illinois activists that helped pass SMCRA, and even after that went on to fight coal mining in Knox County. We have many women leaders. There's great men leaders too that are still doing this in Illinois. So I have a picture here of Joyce Blumenshine, who works on this issue all across the state. Suzanne Smith was one of the leaders that just helped fight and win work on the Bulldog mine in Vermilion County. Mary Ellen DeClue works on the Deer Run mine in Montgomery County. So I just want to very briefly just encourage folks to continue to support Prairie Rivers Network, to support these community leaders and activists that are keeping an eye on and working on these ongoing mining projects in Illinois. And with that, I'll close for today. And again, thank you all for attending.